budget and the role.
Inviting me today. So yeah, Rowan gave me a bit of introduction, but I'll just explain a bit more about the background. So I've been working in the retrofit team at Carbon Coop, and we're based in Manchester in the UK. Over the last year or two, I've been working on a research project, Retrofit for All, specifically looking at how to make energy efficiency schemes work better for people through looking at people-centered approaches. And a lot of that research is informing my presentation. And at the moment, I'm also facilitating an mPOWER Activate group whose project kind of fits into the things I've been researching. So I was asked to speak about different ways that municipalities can work with stakeholders around energy efficiency. And I think the stuff that Mark was saying at the end of his presentations, really, I can really see how that feeds into a lot of the research I've been doing in terms of the sort of finance, power and control that local authorities have or don't have at the moment in the UK, which is, you know, a bit of a challenge. But I'll talk a little bit more about that and hopefully it will be of use to you. So just to give a bit of context in the UK, as you know, sort of local authorities are really constrained through both austerity and also within this sort of energy efficiency world, there's been a sort of marketization of energy efficiency policy, which has not sort of helped get good outcomes, really, the outcomes that local authorities want in terms of supporting their citizens to gain warmer and better homes. And I'll just talk a little bit about some of this policy. The main one here is sort of the energy company obligation. I don't know if it's similar or different in other parts of Europe, but basically it's an obligation on energy companies to reduce carbon emissions through a certain, you know, they have certain obligations, they have to spend a certain amount of money to fund energy efficiency and heating measures. And because of the austerity and other factors, local authorities are often reliant on eco to boost their work around affordable warmth, which is supporting people in fuel poverty to get warmer homes and energy efficiency measures. But part of the problem here is that these energy company obligation, eco, has really driven a marketization of these measures, which hasn't really helped. So there are often perverse incentives to install quick rather than install well, and also focus on single measures. There's quite strict deadlines and penalties, which means this work, you know, has to happen within a certain time, which can lead to rushing. Also, because of this, you know, energy companies are paid for the number of installations they do. They'll often pick the easiest jobs and not do, like, customer services is not required, you know, to meet their aims, which means that, you know, this can lead to really poor quality of works. And also those most impacted by fuel poverty, for example, are often missed out. So I think because there's no incentive, it leads to all sorts of problems with customer service, like missed appointments and delays, poor communication, poor quality of works. And if we're trying to get to this kind of reducing our carbon emissions by a certain, you know, by 2030 or 2050, you know, these poor quality of works and the loss of goodwill is a real problem, because it means that people won't trust, and loss of trust around these kinds of projects has become a real big issue in the UK. And yeah, this is particularly important in the context of fuel poverty, because it leads to dropouts. You know, people kind of saying, well, I've had 3 or 4 missed appointments. I can't be bothered with this anymore. I've, you know, filled out all of this paperwork and I haven't got anything. And, you know, the loss of potential community advocates, which makes it really hard to engage people the second time round or the third time round, as we need to continue going back to people and saying, we want to support your homes to be retrofitted. So I'm just going to look through a couple of examples of how different local authorities have had to try to deal with this and their ways around it, just in terms of looking at reflections of how to work with others. In Manchester a couple of years ago, there was the Green Deal Communities project, so that they basically tried to get quite a real range of funding from different sources. So there was eco, there was Green Deal finance, and then there was some internal funding from different authorities. And this worked to an extent, but there were quite a few shifts in government policy at that time, making it quite difficult to manage. And also they were still at the kind of, they still had the kind of poor quality and customer service of larger companies undertaking this work, who were used to undertaking that work in a particular way, which made it, you know, the results quite mixed. And I think one of the learnings there from reading is those local authorities that had more a resource to have boots on the ground and be knocking on people's doors to get sign-ups and support them and check the quality of works did much better than those local authorities that didn't have that resource internally to do that, and therefore were relying on the sort of contractors to do that kind of work, which, you know, they often wouldn't do it so well. In Scotland, they've got some government funding that alongside eco, and I think this makes quite a big difference in Scotland. And still, the local authorities there still have a problem in terms of not having lots of internal resource, but Changeworks, which is a charity, has sort of sprung up and works with local authorities to support some of those issues around procurement, to support some of the issues around quality assurance. They often have like an on-site quality assurance team there every day during the works and work on the design, to sort of help soften off those blows of the kind of not very the sort of difficulties with eco, basically the sort of third sector organization, and that partnership helps in that context. I mean, they still have difficulties with the timescales, sort of the 1 year funding rounds and things like that, which makes it difficult to do this work well. But they're, you know, they also are quite, when I was speaking to them, I think it was 2 years ago now, they were working on advocacy with the central government, seeing could they get 3 years worth of funding rather than one, so they could use different sizes of contractors rather than just big ones who'd be able to achieve the scale and things like that. So the third example is Portsmouth, which they did a sort of NFET level, so that's a very high level of energy efficiency on a tower blocks council estate that they owned. And I think here they were able to self-fund the whole project, and they resisted all of eco. They have quite a lot of eco providers trying to give them funding, but they said, actually, we want to be able to control the projects ourselves so that we could ensure there was good quality. And they also were able to do the kind of resident engagement stuff to a much higher level because that's what their aims were, and they were able to follow their aims because they were self-funded. They still had issues with procurement because there were, you know, there's only a few large-scale companies that could do this kind of work, and issues with customer service during the build phase. But to a large extent, they were able to manage that project very well. And speaking to some of the officers there, they've sort of said in the current austerity climate, I mean, that was in 2012, I think, or 14, but they wouldn't be able to do that now. They also had a big in-house sort of clerk of works and the teams and in-house in the local authority there. So just to say that kind of, it's really important from the residents' perspective that there's trust, and I think municipalities are really well positioned and usually well trusted in that position, but it's hard to maintain that when you've got a very difficult funding environment and very perverse incentives around that policy funding environment, and that kind of control is so important, and their finance is really key to ensure that municipalities can meet their aims. So the project I'm working on at the moment with mPOWER is between Plymouth and Nottingham, and local authorities in both of those areas really see some of the problems with kind of the funding constraints and the environment that they're in, and they want to look at what would a sustainable funding model look like, working with people, you know, taking a worst first approach when approaching fuel poverty rather than the easiest first. And so to do that, they're looking at what are the needs of those in fuel poverty in their area in terms of what are their homes like, what are their health issues like, and what kind of projects could be funded, how much would those projects cost, what kind of outcomes would that produce for the person living in the house, but also for other local stakeholders. So for example, would it save the local the health trust money if, you know, people who had this type of health problem related to cold homes had their homes retrofitted? And they're doing that to see if they could explore those kind of financial co-benefits with local stakeholders to see if they can create a financial model that's more sustainable and more resilient, and able so that they can do the work that they want to do in a way that works, rather than sort of being beholden to sort of poor government policy. So we'll see how that goes. We're only at the beginning of the project at the moment.